Good evening. We are back to the study of the Spirit's book, chapter 2 of book 4, which is Future Joys and Sorrows. It's the last chapter of the Spirit's book. We are on question 965, Nature of Future Joys and Sorrows. Okay, Philip, can you read for us?
Do the joys and sorrows of the soul after death have any material aspect? Common sense tells you that they cannot be of a material nature, because the soul is not matter. There is nothing carnal in those joys and sorrows, yet they are 1,000 times more vivid than those you experience on earth, because the spirit, when freed from matter, is more sensitive. Matter stifles feelings and sensations.
Okay. When we are incarnated, our physical body serves as a shield for many of our feelings, and we are kind of protected from things that we bring from our past and from difficulties in relation to people that we know from the spiritual world. On the other hand, of course, the physical body brings us all the issues that comes with the physical body, the diseases, the challenges of maintaining a physical body, which is a distraction from our spiritual problems many times. When we are back in the spiritual world, with no longer a physical body, still a spiritual body, there is no distractions that the physical body provided to us. So everything that we think and feel amplifies both joys and sorrows. And that's where spirits that lead a good life will find themselves blessed and in the company of their loved ones and in places, in joyful places. Now, spirits that are struggling with what they left behind in terms of material possessions, material relationships of the physical world, regrets and other inferior tendencies, without the physical body to distract them from this, all this gets amplified and gets more difficult to deal with, and you have some sort of issues that happen in the spiritual world that we are going to see in the next questions here. We're going to enter a little more deeper into those difficulties that we find ourselves in the spiritual world when we carry with us the sorrows. So everything is amplified in the spiritual world in the sense that we lose the shield. So it becomes really we with ourselves and nothing else, right? And no distractions around in a way that the physical body and living incarnated brings to us. That's why a lot of spirits, they ask, if they can, they ask for a new incarnation so sometimes they can escape their own selves from the spiritual world because they know that they will bring the forgetfulness of the past and the shield of the physical body to protect them against themselves. Okay. Questions, comments? (966).
Why do people often form unrefined and absurd ideas of the joys and sorrows of the future life, because their intelligence is still imperfectly developed. Does a child understand things to the same capacity as an adult? Besides, their idea of a future life is often a result of the education to which they have been subjected, an education that urgently needs to be reformed. Your language is too incomplete to express what transcends your present existence. So we have to communicate with you using comparisons borrowed from that existence. As a result, you have mistaken images and figures for reality. As humanity becomes enlightened, its thought understands much that its language is unable to express.
Okay, so here is basically dealing with the notions we bring from our religious backgrounds throughout the centuries, right? The notion of heaven and hell and all this associated, the images associated with these ideas of the spiritual world, as Kardec asks here, unrefined and absurd ideas, right? Our intelligence is limited, right? As they say here, it's still imperfectly developed. And because we have no remembrance of our life in the spiritual world, we are subject to what they say here, the education and the external influences that are brought to us from others, from the religions, from other beliefs. And this has been used throughout humanity's evolution as a way to control and as a way to prevent people from abusing their physical lives, right, or their rights, which, you know, in a way it's good, and in another way it's bad, because if you don't allow a 2-year-old to do whatever they want, 3-year-old, because they are going to end up getting in trouble, hurting themselves, or so you need to control. But if you control too much, you don't allow them to develop their knowledge, learning, and learn from their mistakes, right? If you prevent a child from learning how to walk, when you learn how to walk, you fall 1,000 times, but then you start walking, right? If you prevent a child from walking because you're afraid the child is going to fall, what's going to happen? The child is never going to learn to walk. So it's important for us to have both the control and the freedom. Our problem is when we go too much to one side or the other, right? We try to control too much, end up forming a group of rebellious spirits, individuals that run to the other side, and too much freedom without the understanding of what you're doing with it also create problems for ourselves. So that's how we've been educated throughout the centuries, right? And nowadays, much more, we are finding much more freedom, much more ability to express our thoughts and choices within certain limitations, and still facing difficulties here and there, some places more than others. But with that, the concept of what happens in the afterlife is still very much hazy, right? Very few philosophies, doctrines, or religions explain well what is the afterlife, right? Besides Spiritism, that explains quite detail, it's very difficult to find other belief systems that explains the spiritual world. So if nothing is given to us, we either make our own conclusions, which is limited by our own knowledge, or we reject everything, which is also something that it's been happening a lot. So, if you don't know how to deal with the spiritual world and nobody tells you anything, you're either going to form absurd ideas or beliefs, or you're going to reject everything, and then it becomes more difficult for you to move on. So, of course, Spiritism has been here for more than 150 years, but still not many people, even Spiritists, have a very basic knowledge of what happens in the afterlife. I see many questions in these programs that I've been watching online on Q&A sessions. People asking Spiritists, asking basic questions, right? About life in the spiritual world. We have the material, we have the books, we have, especially for Brazilians that have thousands of books that they can read. Here in the US, for Spiritists here, we have almost 200 books translated into English, so we have enough books also. By the way, the book by Leon Denis that I couldn't remember the name on Sunday is Life and Destiny. Okay, that we couldn't remember what was the name. Life and Destiny is the most well-recognized book of Leon Denis in terms of quality of his publications. We discussed on the Q&A also. Anyways, so again, information is out there. Today, we have access to information. But the thing is, how do we separate the wheat from the chaff? And how we choose, right, to understand the subject, and we need to be interested, right? The spirits told us here 160 years ago, an education that urgently needs to be reformed. That's in the answer. And we see that still barely reformed, right? Still, you go to most religions, they continue to teach you the same things that they were teaching 100, 200, 300 years ago, right? Or refusing to discuss the afterlife, which is something that happens in some of the religions also, right? So, again, it's difficult when you have no guidance to find the correct information or believable information, for you to find your own path. But anyway, we can do only what we can here, right? We study, we discuss, we spread, but we're limited by the lack of widespread knowledge of this information. Okay.
I think the second part of the answer that deals with the poverty of our language, that's extremely important as well. It forces them to use analogies to create images that it could correlate with to have a better understanding of the life in the spiritual world. But mistakenly, we translated those images as the reality. And that I believe, and on top of it, the religious institutions created dogmas. Now you cannot contest, now you cannot argue, you must accept those mistaking realities to images to reality. And that complicates, make us even more difficult for us to expand a more reasonable idea of the spiritual world. I know I was criticized in the past for saying this, but I think that even author like André Luiz and other that talks a lot about the life in the spiritual world, many times they have to use images, they have to make correlations of things that make sense to us. Because if they bring things that does not exist at all here in this physical world, how can we understand? So they have to create analogies for us to understand. And it is up to us to use reason and understand and be able to differentiate analogies, metaphors, images from reality.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm working on the translation of the Consoler by Emmanuel, right? It's a book with 411 questions. And one of the questions I was reading today is exactly when Chico or someone asks Emmanuel to explain how is the other worlds in terms of the life in other worlds, and Emmanuel answers exactly that. You don't have words for me to answer. I have to use the words that you have, and it's very limited, right? It's exactly that.
And that's the second part of this answer here. It's very important to consider also.
Yeah. You have mistaken images and figures for reality. It's very important. Yeah.
I have a question. I have a comment. I think somewhere in the Spirit book it talks about we don't have the senses that we have are very limited. It's along the same lines, but like they have senses that we cannot even imagine because they have other ways of seeing things or understanding things, right? So even like I guess our physical and physiological formation of the body doesn't. It's just like a fews, let's say, tools that we use as opposed to what they have, which is or the Spirit has. They meaning the Spirit. Can sort of go really far because of other ways to interpret information.
Yeah, Rosario was talking about the five senses that we have here when we are incarnated, and of course, the spirit has different abilities to interact with each other with the spiritual world that we don't have even words to explain, right? To describe, and it's exactly that. We are limited by our language, and that's why they end up the answer here talks as humanity becomes enlightened, its thought understands much that its language is unable to express, right? Which is
so the images that say that Moses had to use, that Jesus had to use at that time, perhaps they don't have to use so much imagery. Today they have the development of sciences that were able to have an idea of more abstracted concepts. You know, I mean, electricity, something that you don't see, that you cannot palpate, and if you and it's essential to our lives today.
Yeah.
Right? The idea that when you look up the sky and you see stars that had died 300, 400 years ago, it's completely normal for us to understand. Tell that to someone at the time of Moses. They're gonna call you crazy. They're gonna throw you stones.
yeah, true. Burn in the fire, right?
Well, now we are able to understand a lot more abstract concepts. Makes sense to us. At that time, the good spirits trying to teach us used to have all those images, those metaphors, and unfortunately, have been converted in reality. Adam and Eve is a great example of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay.
967. What does the happiness of good spirits consist of? In knowing all things, feeling neither hatred, jealousy, envy, ambition, nor any of the passions that make human beings miserable. Their mutual love is a source of supreme happiness. They have none of the wants and anxieties of material life and are happy in the good they do, because the happiness of spirits is always proportionate to their degree of elevation. Only perfectly pure spirits enjoy the highest happiness. However, others are happy on different levels. Between bad and perfect spirits, there is an infinite range of elevation and happiness, as the joy of each spirit is always proportionate to its moral state. Those who have already achieved a certain degree of advancement have a perception of the happiness of those who are further along. they seek higher happiness, but as an object of immolation rather than jealousy. They know that it is solely up to them to reach it, and they work to that end with the tranquility of a good conscience. They are happy in not having to suffer what inferior spirits endure.
It's challenging question, right? Because for us to have knowledge of what's above us, we don't have the knowledge, and the spirits try to explain here. In a way, it's a very good explanation, right? When we don't feel hatred, jealousy, envy, ambition, nor any of the passions that make human beings miserable, you find happiness, right? But because we still have, in one way or another, we have all those things within us, right? We don't really understand what is not to have them, right? You may not be very jealous, be a jealous person, but I don't think any one of us can say that we have no jealousy at all, right? So if we still have it, we don't really have the ability to understand in practice what happiness consists of. But in theory, the spirits explain to us that once we get rid of those imperfections that ties us to the material world and makes us continue this cycle of reincarnations, we are going to find happiness. But then they say also that, as we become more evolved, we slowly are going to achieve more happiness than all those that are less evolved than us. And we see this in, when André Luiz talks about life in the spiritual world and he goes through the different experiences he has on the books, you find spirits that are unhappy, profoundly angry, and spirits that are able already to have some sort of happiness, still with some suffering, right? So you see, again, when we look at our lives, right? We have happy moments on our lives here on Earth, right? They are limited in time and in amplitude, but we can imagine what it would be to have it for a longer period of time. But what we can learn from this is, again, what to fight, what limitations we have, imperfections we have to fight against on ourselves, right? Hatred, jealousy, envy, ambition, or any other passions, right? As long as we are still tied to the material world in terms of attachment to material things and unhealthy attachment to people, that we are also still here, right? Because the pure love that we aim to feel towards one another, that's not where we are. Even within the ones we love in our families, we still have an imperfect love, right? Because it's still a love that asks for something in return most of the time, right? So again, it's the more, if you study psychology and spirituality, and Joanna de Angelis, she talks about happiness coming from within ourselves, right? That we have to move away from the concept that happiness will come from outside to us. It's not. Until we find happiness within ourselves, independently of what's happening around us, we are still going to struggle. But again, it's a challenge, and what we can do is be more aware of it and be more conscious of the necessary steps that we need to take to find relative happiness, because the Spirits tells us here in the book, the Spirit's book, that relative happiness, it is possible to achieve in this world. And relative happiness is detaching from material things and elevating ourselves morally and intellectually as much as possible within our limitations. Okay? Questions, comments?
$9.68. You stated that the absence of material wants is one of the conditions of happiness for spirits. Is it not the satisfaction of these wants a source of joy for people? Yes, it is an animal pleasure. When people cannot satisfy those wants, they are tormented by them.
Yeah. Material needs can provide us with temporary happiness, or as the Kardec talks in the question, a joy, can be a source of joy, but it's temporary, right? Because the material possessions is not going to bring us the real happiness. And a study that they did with people that won the lottery, right? That after 6 months, they are back to where they were before in terms of mindset, not in terms of money, in terms of mindset, same problems, same afflictions. So if money was the solution, that wouldn't be the case, right? You would find that these people would be happier. And if after 6 months they are back to the old habits, it's clearly the proof that wealth is not the answer. Can be an instrument for us to do the right things, and can be a very useful instrument, but it's not the source of happiness. It's something that is going to be temporary, and it's not going to be to solve our real issues. Okay.
$9.69.
Yeah.
What does it mean when people say that pure spirits are united in God's heart in active devotion? This statement is an allegorical representation of the knowledge they possess with regard to God's perfections. They see and understand God. However, you must not interpret this metaphor any more literally than other statements of a similar nature. Everything in nature, from the grain of sand up, is devoted, meaning proclaims God's power, wisdom, and goodness. You must not assume that high spirits are absorbed in eternal contemplation, which would be an unwise and monotonous happiness, and furthermore, a selfish one, because their existences would be of perpetual uselessness. They no longer undergo the tribulations of corporal life, an exemption that is a joy in itself. As we say, they know everything. They make use of the intelligence they have acquired in helping the progress of other spirits. They find great joy in this occupation.
Yeah. Again, another phrase that is brought to us, right? That the pure spirits are united in active devotion to God. We know that from Spiritism that the perfect spirits work directly with God. But that as much as we know. How does this work? We don't understand, and we probably don't have words, don't have the ability to explain that. And also, when we talk about God and the spirits and these spirits working incessantly, our thought of work is always associated with something that makes us tired, right? Mentally or physically. And it's not the case, right? These spirits, they work 24/7, but they don't have the issues we have with work. So for us also to understand that, it's hard. It's very difficult, right? We cannot take it literally, what they say here, these expressions. What we need to understand is that the spirits, the more evolved spirits, work at all times, work to the help to help others, and in that they find joy and happiness, constant joy and happiness. And this is as much as we can go, right? These concepts of us, as the Spirit says here, of staying in the spiritual world doing nothing, it's against all, even our limited understanding. It doesn't make any sense, right? Because how long can you spend here doing nothing, right? Doing nothing, right? I was the other day I was hearing an athlete that went into one of these dark retreats. I never heard of it before. You go into a dark place, a dark room, and you stay there for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 days without anything, without light. You just receive food twice a day, and that's it. So you have no idea if it's day or night or anything, and it's used for you to reflect, or it's a spiritual experiences, things like that. And this athlete was saying that for him it was very good, but he has no plans of going back to do it again. And I was thinking, well, if it was that good, you would want to go back, right? If it worked. But you can imagine, if you stay in a place like this, how long can you stay in a place like this without going crazy, in a sense, right? So projecting that to us as in the spiritual world, we can understand that there's no way we are going to stay there without doing anything. Even these inferior spirits, they are there doing something. They are there disturbing others, right? But they are not there not doing anything. So the inactivity doesn't exist. The famous expression, rest in peace, doesn't exist, because they are not resting and they are not in peace. You can be very different things, happy, unhappy, active, but they're not resting. You may be resting for some time, right? You read stories of spirits that are put to sleep because they need to go under treatment, and but the concept of doing nothing in the spiritual world doesn't exist.
That's another problem of the poverty of language, right? Here, at least they say in active devotion. So active in itself eliminates nothingness in itself, yeah. Right? But when Christ says, no, my Father and I are one, people misunderstood. They say that Jesus and God is the same thing. That is still carries to this day.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's all right. Any questions, comments? Okay, let's go to something we will understand better.
970. What does the suffering of inferior spirits consist of? Their suffering is as varied as the causes by which they are produced, and correspond to the inferiority of each spirit as the joys of higher spirits are proportionate to their superiority. Their suffering may be summed up as follows: inability to obtain it, feeling regret, jealousy, rage, and despair in regard to what prevents them from being happy, and being tormented by remorse and indescribable moral anguish. They long for all sorts of joys and are tortured by their inability to satisfy their cravings.
Yeah, well, this we understand, right? Suffering of inferior spirits, because we are all there, right? So, but here we are talking about the future joys and sorrows. So we are talking about spirits in the spiritual world. And they suffer because of their inability to overcome their own minds, right? Their own issues. They carry back to the spiritual world the regrets, jealousy, rage, despair, and all of this becomes a source of constant feeding in their thoughts, and that creates the struggles that the inferior spirits have in the spiritual world. And according to their mental vibrations is that they are going to find themselves in different places in the spiritual world, right? I mentioned this before, right? Spirits that are surrounded by regret, that have their issues. They are not actively doing evil. They are just feeling pains, regrets, and everything related to their physical life is the spirits that we find in the lower zones, the umbral, right? Spirits that are actively interested in persecuting others, in causing harm to others, are the ones that we are going to find in the places like we just studied in the book Liberation, right? That is places led by Gregorio in the lower zones, right? So, you know, depends on where we have our mind focus. We can stay around. We can stay around our physical bodies that are dead. We can stay around our loved ones that we cannot leave behind, our material pleasures. And the problem with those attached to the material pleasures, meaning addictions or different types of addictions, is that they are trying to enjoy what they used to have when they were incarnated, and they cannot. They depend on others, so that's how they associate with other spirits to partake their addictions and the pleasure that or the supposed pleasure that is spirits take on their addiction to share with them. So you have those that are addicted to sex, to alcohol, to drugs, connected to the addicts also. So, but this again doesn't solve the problem, right? Doesn't bring them happiness. It brings temporary relief, and then it starts again. So it's a source of moral anguish, indescribable moral anguish, right? That the spirits mention here. They long for all sorts of joys and are tortured by the inability to satisfy their cravings, because they are still looking for pleasures in their own places, right? The source of pleasure, the source of happiness is not there. They are not going to find there. So they end up in this vicious circle of trying to find, having temporary relief and going back and struggling until something different happens and they are able to address these issues. But it's very difficult for the inferior spirits, and assistance is there at all times. That's important also for us to remind everyone, right? But these spirits, they close themselves to receive the assistance. when they finally open themselves, assistance is always there. Again, we go back to André Luiz in the beginning of Nosso Lar. Spent 8 years in the lower zones, struggling, suffering, not understanding what was going on with him, with regrets, with a lot of confusion. When finally he, from the bottom of his heart, he asked for help, then the help was there, right? So help is always there. And he asks his mother later, where were you? And she said, I was always close to you, but you couldn't see me because we don't open ourselves. So that's something also important, because a lot of times I see these questions coming. Where is the assistant, the divine assistance? Where is the help of the spiritual benefactors? Where is the help of our guardian angels? They're always prepared and ready to help us. We are the ones that do not allow them to help us because of our own mental struggles. Okay. Questions?
971. Is the influence exercised by spirits over one another always good? It is always good on the part of good spirits, but perverse spirits try to lead astray those whom they believe to be susceptible to being misled from the path of repentance and amendment, and whom they have often led into wrongdoing during earthly life. So does death not deliver us from temptation? No, but the action of malevolent spirits is much less powerful over other spirits than over incarnates, because they no longer feel material passions.
Yeah, that's an interesting answer, but we'll get there. We are influenced by spirits more than we think. That's a question. I don't remember the number. The question that is in the Spirit's book back there, right? So when it's a good spirit, they are always trying to help us and to inspire us. So the influence is always good by good spirits. Our guardian angels, our familiar spirits, those that want to help us, they're always trying to help us and inspire us. But the spirits, perverse spirits, as they say here, will try to deviate us from the right path. And the reason can be either for something personal, that they want to revenge because we caused them harm in the previous existence, or we are associated with someone that they want to cause harm, and they associate with us to cause, because we are more able to enter into sympathy with them, or because we are just, they have no personal association with us, but they were doing something that pleases them, right? One of these addictions that I was mentioning before, let's say I smoke, spirits that used to smoke are going to associate with me to share the cigarette that I'm having, so they can fulfill part of their addictions that we carry back to the spiritual world, right? And that's the second question, which is interesting, right? When Kardec asks if death does not deliver us from temptation, and then the spirits answer that the action of malevolent spirits is much less power over other spirits than over incarnates. And after reading all the books of André Luiz, right, we reflect how is this, right? But the reality here, what the spirits are trying to tell us is that the influence of one spirit over other in terms of material things, it's much less powerful there, because both do not have access to material things. So they can influence by thought, but they cannot influence like here, because a spirit will come if you are trying to quit something that causes you harm. You have spirits associated with you that will try to prevent you from quitting whatever, but again, it's material. We are in the material world. So in the spiritual world, from one spirit to another, they have many ways of influencing one another, and they do, as we read a lot in the books of André Luiz. But in terms of material passions, it's much more difficult for them because both of them are in the spiritual world and do not have easy access to material passions in the sense of, in the same way as incarnates have. That's how I understand this answer. I don't know if you have a different opinion there or different thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. They at least a little bit more evolved. Do you recognize that they don't have material needs anymore? So being attracted for material things is much lesser than right here. And another thing that I think makes a difference is the simple fact that while we are incarnate, they are invisible and they can give us suggestions with their thoughts that we may take as our own thoughts. We don't even perceive that we are receiving those suggestions from a third party. And in the spiritual world, now the spiritual world, you'll be face to face with those spirits, which allow you to think a little bit better, because no, it's not me saying this, it's that guy saying, and I want to follow that guy. As if you're receiving thoughts, images from invisible spirits, maybe think that's your own, maybe you're more likely to follow it.
Yeah. Okay.
$972.
Yes.
How do malevolent spirits tempt other spirits, since they do not have passions? Passions no longer exist materially. However, they still exist in the thought of lower spirits, and the wicked ones keep impure thoughts in their victims by taking them to places where they witness the exercise of those passions and whatever else can excite them. But what is the purpose of those passions, since they no longer have any real object? That is precisely what tortures them. Misers see gold that they cannot possess. Depraved individuals see orgies in which they cannot partake. Arrogant people see honors that they envy but cannot share.
So we actually have passions in the spiritual world, and no longer materially, but in thought, right? So we carry our passions from here to there. So the leaders of the lower zones, they know how to influence other spirits to dominate them and use their own inferior thoughts against them to cause them harm and to control them. If you remember the book Liberation, again, Gregorio, right? He was a judge of the spirits, the inferior spirits there, and he made them face the reality of their inferiority and their inferior passions, and punishing them by their inferior passions that they carry with them. That lady that he made her transform herself in the wolf, right, in the lycanthropy. Those spirits that became ovoids, which it's with the mono ideas. Those spirits, they live in with these passions that they have inside of them. It can be hatred, it can be jealousy, it can be all sorts of inferior passions. And the spirits that are wicked but more intellectually prepared are able to dominate those inferior spirits, right? And how they cause them pain is even by taking them to places where they can feel the temptations and cannot participate, right? There is a book from Divaldo Franco, from Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, I think it's called Sex and Obsession. if I'm not mistaken, that Manoflo de Miranda describes one of these orgies in the spiritual world, that looks like some of the parties that we have here in the physical world, right? And the spirits that control these parties and the scenes that are described are very impressive. So, spirits have the ability to control others and to use their inferior passions, right? Why these spirits, again, the same question, why these spirits are not protected? Because they allow themselves to become subject of their own thoughts, right? If they show any inclination to start working to get rid of those passions, their help and assistance will be there immediately for them. They can be taken to places where they can start addressing. But these spirits are so much immersed in their own inferior thoughts that they don't entertain the idea of getting rid of it. They are just like the addicts here that you try to rescue them from those places, and drug addicts, right? And they have no desire to get rid of it. If they want help is always available, but a lot of them do not want help. They want to continue. So it's the same thing, right? Again, the spiritual world, here is a reflection of the spiritual world. Okay. Oh, we have a very long question here. So let me stop here, Philip, because the next question is very long. So let's leave it for next week.
Okay.
The greatest sufferings that a bad spirit can endure. Let's talk about it next week. Okay. So this weekend is the Labor Day weekend here in the US, right? So we will be closed on Monday for Labor Days. SGNY will not be open. We don't have Saturday lecture by the United States Spiritist Federation also, but we have our study on Sunday, 11 a.m. on the book Between Heaven and Earth, chapters 11 and 12. Book club next week, chapter 9, on Wednesday at 7 p.m. And I think that's all for us. Carol, can you do our final prayer?
Joel,
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes, Philip?
just wanted to let you know, the next 3 weeks I will be on a cruise.
Enjoy. Have
I'm gonna
fun.
try.
Okay, you made everyone jealous here. We just study our imperfections, and then you bring something to make everyone jealous.
Well, I hope the results of the cruise will be jealousy from you guys rather than torment for me.
We hope so. Enjoy, and
Thank you.
we'll see you when you're back. Thanks.
Bon voyage, Philip. Happy
Thank
sailing. Great. Okay. Infinite Creator and Supreme Intelligence, we give thanks for the opportunity to be together for our study of the Spirit's Book, Chapter 2, Future Joys and Sorrows. Mistaken images have often been accepted as reality. We are limited often by language, allowing dogmas and perpetual teachings to explain the spiritual world and even our world. There are infinite ranges of spiritual refinement and evolution. Inferior spirits must endure things that elevated spirits do not encounter. Relative happiness comes from within by elevating ourselves morally and intellectually. May we try the best we can through our endeavoring to express non-attachment to the material acquisitions and the physical life whenever possible. This will help us in our future life, in the afterlife, so that we will not be drawn back in to these particular vibrations. And we always pray that we will be open to receive assistance no matter what level that we go into the spiritual world being. As we give thanks now to our spiritual benefactors and the good spirits for guiding us and inspiring us this evening, may we receive the love, light, and peace of Christ within us for our loved ones, our teachers, the directors, our counselors, the mediums, the workers, and those who are affiliated with SGNY who are participating. We pray for inner peace and especially for world peace for all those who are suffering in the physical world as well as the spiritual world. We pray for SGNY and all Spiritist centers throughout the world that they may grow, expand, always be protected day and night. As we close, we humbly ask for safety and protection as we return to our family, friends, loved ones, and co-workers. May we realize and remember that we are never alone and that we always wish and hope and pray that we will be beacons of light for all those that we encounter. Go forth now in peace, love, light, service, and charity. So be it.